From the studios of the Department of Communication in Phillipsburg, welcome to Prime Minister Talks with Honorable Prime Minister Sylvia Jacobs.
Good afternoon, St. Martin, and welcome to another episode of Prime Minister Talks. I'm Cedric Peterson, and alongside the Prime Minister of St. Martin, the Honorable Sylvia Jacobs, PM. Great to have you back in studio for episode 6. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's great to be back, and good afternoon to you, to Cedric, and to the people of St. Martin tuned in.
Folks, it's great to have you here for our 6th episode of the program. Prime Minister, you had a very busy week. You went overseas, traveled to the Netherlands, had a working visit there. You're back now on the island dealing with our issues here at home. Let's go ahead and jump right into the questions that were posed to your cabinet this week. Question number 1 deals with what are the actions being taken by the Ministry of General Affairs to address the lack of knowledge of addresses, home addresses, that seems to be plaguing the post office and their ability to be able to deliver mail to these addresses?
Yes, that's a question that has plagued, especially post the election era, where many cards were returned, etc. And the Ministry of General Affairs on the Civil Registry Department can only really address when the persons come in. So when persons come in, then they can ascertain whether they had a change of address or not. So actually, I would like to appeal to people who know they have moved to actually register that. To avoid that they miss getting their mails, etc. We, in a discussion actually today, the SG informed that they are constantly busy trying to update the registry. Mm-hmm. And so that's an ongoing process. And of course, with elections happening every so often, you cannot get it finalized before the next election happens. So hopefully, seeing that we have a 4-year gap, we'll be able to do that. According to the law, and this has been debated heavily, once you have, you're not residing within St. Martin, that you should actually write out of the registry. But I would like to do some more research to see whether, I know the former Prime Minister had that discussion as former head as well, in terms of having a special registry, especially we having so many students abroad. We have St. Martiners who are abroad, and in other countries, when those persons are abroad, they still have the right to vote. They still have the right to a lot of other situations, especially you're in a foreign country, then you are not registered anywhere. Mm-hmm. So whether it is for study, for work, for illness, or whatever the case may be, we must find a way within our law. And if it doesn't exist, I'll be asking within our planning for the next 4 years for Civil Registry to actually address that in a tangible manner. So we are waiting at this point. Right. It's based on people coming in, giving information, updating information, and ensuring that I think it's your civic duty to ensure that you are properly registered at your place of residence.
That's it. And that's the question I was about to ask you in regard to the registration process. Encouraging, actually not a question, but more the encouragement of the population going out there and registering. We actually do have an interview with the Civil Registry.
Great.
And they have definitely talked about that topic in our Inside Government interview here on St. Martin Gov Radio. So, you need to pay
and if I
attention
can add, like these are, every time I come to these PM talks and deal with some of the questions, you get a little flag, and it's great to be in contact with the public this way to see areas where we need to improve. Also in communication to the public. So we want to build up a real communication portfolio for the ministries, all of the ministries for government. I'm using PM Talks. And as we move forward, I'll be inviting ministers in to sit in with me. So it would be more than just a PM Talks, but literally that we can put out information campaigns for the information that the public is asking about. So things such as this. So don't wait until an election to fix your registration, because it can be hampering your mail address, etc., because that's what the post office uses.
I'll even go as far as mentioning it even hampers the progression of the Parliament of St. Martin, because the Parliament of St. Martin is directly hinged by constitutional law.
Upon your numbers.
That's correct. So once we get that census count in and we are at a specific level, then our Parliament is supposed to increase. So another issue to keep in mind.
Yes.
Question number 2 goes into interesting one. What are some of the ways in which the Dutch and French governments of St. Martin collaborate in the interest of all?
Actually, we do collaborate on several areas. We collaborate in the sectors of youth, under education called Youth and Sports, under Youth and Education. Lots of collaborations, especially on an international level, things that have to do with the sustainable development goals, education for all, protection, not just for youth, but of course within our police systems, we have a clear-cut cooperation agreement so that anything that happens on the Dutch or French side, they collaborate on together, protection of our land and seas, and patrolling of the borders, etc. In health, there's also agreements. And we have several EU projects, which as a country or as an island, 37 square miles, we are at the table together, wastewater management and, of course, underground, doing some underground work, etc., infrastructural works, whereby the EU is the funding agent and the Department of BUC under the Ministry of General Affairs is directly the program director for those projects. So actually, since coming to the Ministry of General Affairs, I'm seeing even more and more areas where we do collaborate that doesn't necessarily get enough airplay. And actually in celebrations, we have St. Martin Day, we have Treaty of Concordia Day, which is the 23rd of March upcoming, which is actually the date when the island is, quote unquote, celebrating the peaceful coexistence of two countries on one 37 square mile island in peace. So we're already in discussion with Madam Vice President Valerie Damaso, who has that under her portfolio. I was involved in years past as Minister of Education, but I would like to, as Minister of Prime Minister, Minister of General Affairs, highlight the importance and the responsibility of the Minister of General Affairs in dealing with anything related to the nation and nation building. And so the nationality question, the question on who is a Saint Martiner, was always with me as Minister of Education, but within the laws, that actually falls within the Ministry of General Affairs. And so via this cooperation and collaboration, we will move more towards our cultural identity as Saint Martiners, STMARTINERS. That's the English spelling, because I like to clarify that for the general public. And then for us as Saint Martin, our Dutch citizenship, qua our who we are. And when we make laws to say this is a Saint Martin, a Dutch Saint Martiner, that there are certain privileges that should come with that. Because right now, we are just as equal as a Dutch Cursilinian living here, just as equal as a Dutch anybody, because it is one passport and no clear definition in the Saint Martin. As you will always hear the YDK, the UD Curaçao, and who is a Rubian and who isn't a Rubian. But we're getting there, and during this first year, that will be my goal as General Affairs Minister, to come clearer on that so that we can closely collaborate and understand what are cultural celebrations and what are national celebrations for St. Martin. So in those areas, we collaborate as well.
St. Martin, you're listening to Prime Minister Talks here on St. Martin Gov Radio 107.9 FM with the Honorable Sylveria Jacobs. We'll be taking a break. Let's get into your questions after the break. Next thing coming up deals with the financial position of St. Martin, especially as it relates to liquidity support. Stay with us. You're listening and viewing Prime Minister Talks on St. Martin Gov Radio 107.9.
Prime Minister Talks with Honorable Prime Minister Sylveria Jacobs.
Every day at the Civil Registry Department, we are confronted with at least one customer who did not pay attention to the expiration date of their passport, such as the Lockharts. To avoid this from happening to you and your family, we urge you to check the validity of your passport. If your passport is about to expire, please follow these simple steps to make an appointment. Visit appointments.stmartingov.org and follow the easy steps. All applicants must apply in person, last issued Dutch passport, 2 recent photos taken within 6 months. Minors must be present with legal guardians. Fee for adults, 210 guilders. Fee for minors, 150 guilders. Additional information can be requested. 4 weeks processing time. Your identity is your responsibility.
Prime Minister Talks with Honorable Prime Minister Sylveria Jacobs.
You're listening to Prime Minister Talks on St. Martin Gov Radio 107.9 FM. I'm Cedric Peterson alongside the Prime Minister of St. Martin, the Honorable Severia Jacobs. We left off answering your questions, and we're going to pick up from the third question on our list today. This is, will St. Martin be in a better financial position once it receives the liquidity support needed?
Yes, that was the main reason for our visit to the Netherlands, Minister Arian as Minister of Finance and myself. It was very important for us to secure that liquidity support. Why? St. Martin over the past 2 years has been functioning with whatever income has come in. The liquidity that was given in 2018 were the first 2 tranches. And the third tranche, when we talk about liquidity support, the last part, it was like 3 portions. The last portion had not been disseminated. Based on the fact that our economy looked like it was doing much better. It didn't seem like it would be needed. In 2019, however, in March, it was decided in the Kingdom Council of Ministers that yes, we would get it, and that out of the 30, 21 million was without conditions. And then a 2019 amount was also agreed upon of 22 million. So if you add them up, it's like 52 million. However, again, based on the fact that it didn't appear that we needed it urgently, that it wasn't an urgent need, it was not disseminated. What is clear is that the CFT made an advice, and several times during the year 2019, just passed, that St. Martin's liquidity position was in peril because of not having received those funds. Why? You must have a certain amount of reserves in your budget for contingencies, which they determined should be at least 2 months. And our monthly needs are 40 million. So 80 million should be on your reserves in case of any contingency. In some of the agreements made, we've had arrears. The hurricane didn't help any of that. But in order to receive liquidity support, etc., St. Martin agreed to pay off or continue to pay on these arrears, which was to TELEM, which is to APS, which is to SZV. And in the year 2019, we paid over 50 million in arrears. So that also took down our reserve position. We're still not back up to where we were in terms of income. And so in paying out those outstanding amounts, paying down on them because we are still in arrears, that put us in a difficult position to be now 30-something million in reserves. That is 50 million or so below where we should be. So yes, it puts us in a much better financial position that you are then at ease. It's just like having your household budget. You should have a savings, an amount put aside for any contingencies. And it doesn't always work. We live from hand to mouth, but as a country, it is not responsible to live from hand to mouth. And these were also agreements that had been made before. So yes, it does definitely improve our financial position.
Any creative aspects being looked at by the Minister of Finance or the government overall to get us back to where we need to be?
Yes, we continue to talk about areas where we should have been prior to and then now post, especially in agreement. A lot of conditions were laid upon the country, which I must say we, and I use that term loosely, agreed to, but the government agreed to a lot of things that they could not actually uphold or keep up, especially if you needed to make capital investments. And once we receive capital investments as well, then we're able to correct and improve on certain areas so that you're able to collect the funds. So our financial management, etc., needs to be improved. Investments in our prison, etc., needs to be made so that we can actually serve the population and serve, on an international level, be where we should be. So on one hand, you're being held accountable to make improvements, but during the year 2019, again, we were not able to receive the capital expenditures necessary to improve our collection ability of taxes, as well as make the necessary improvements in our infrastructure and other areas that would see St. Martin's people feeling the brunt of or feeling the effect positively of investments made in our community.
The next question is in line with the first one we just asked there. Will the capital expenditures budget also be released by the Dutch government now that the liquidity support has been renegotiated?
Yes, Cedric. I must explain though. A lot of people hear us talking about the liquidity support and the capital expenditures, and they think that, oh, we're begging the Dutch again. Based on our constitutional setup, if St. Martin requires a loan, we must go via the Netherlands. And so this is what these two things are. They are basically loans. It is not a gift. It is not a grant. If you want to talk about gifts or grants, that's the trust fund. And that also has many other,
checks and balances.
And whatnot connected to it. And it's taken much longer than had been originally planned. So not getting our own capital investment budget up, which was approved, transferred to the central bank so that we could make use of it, which should have happened in October or September last year. This did not happen, but with our discussions with the Dutch government and our decision from the Kingdom Council of Ministers on Friday last, we were able to also agree that the budgeted amount for last year, as well as what is budgeted for this year, would be coming to the country. And so therefore, we hope with the passing of our budget, well, not hope, we expect that with the passing of our budget over the next couple of weeks, that we will be able to then start to see that fund being transferred to the central bank and St. Martin having access to be able to execute much needed projects for St. Martin, including repairing of the prison and other infrastructural works, but especially what relates to the finance department in terms of restructuring that and the ICT department so that we can improve government's functioning in general.
That media concept that's playing out there concerning the fact that, once again, the carrot's being dangled in front of us, and it seems like as if we can't reach it unless, of course, we meet demands. Is that real?
Well, I could say that in some respects, but I believe with the dialogue that we've held over the past week with our kingdom partners, there is a better understanding. There is an openness and a willingness to listen. There is frustration on their part that they're constantly speaking to a different person, which I can understand. And they're tired of the promises and not enough action. But I think between myself and Minister Aaron, we were able to clearly explain and show that the vicious circle that we find ourselves in, regardless to who is representing St. Martin's government, puts St. Martin in a negative position if promises are made for capital investments, if promises are made for a loan that would balance our liquidity and keep our reserves up are not kept. And if those things are tied to other areas which ties the hands of Parliament to make this decision, or else you're hampering the country, it takes away from the trias politica. And they understood that. Minister Arian was able to also provide an alternative to some of their conditions, and we were able to get them to agree that the pension reform should not be a condition to us receiving a loan from the Netherlands, which we are repaying.
You're listening to Prime Minister Talks here on St. Martin Gov Radio 107.9. Stay with us. Your last question as it relates to the Princess Juliana International Airport coming up in our final segment. Stay tuned.
Prime Minister Talks with Honorable Prime Minister Sylvia Jacobs.
Every day at the Civil Registry Department, we are confronted with at least one customer who did not pay attention to the expiration date of their passport, such as the Lockharts. To avoid this from happening to you and your family, we urge you to check the validity of your passport. If your passport is about to expire, please follow these simple steps to make an appointment. Visit appointments.stmartingov.org and follow the easy steps. All applicants must apply in person, last issued Dutch passport, 2 recent photos taken within 6 months. Minors must be present with legal guardians. Fee for adults, 210 guilders. Fee for minors, 150 guilders. Additional information can be requested. 4 weeks processing time. Your identity is your responsibility.
Prime Minister Talks with Honorable Prime Minister Sylvia Jacobs.
Listeners, we're in our final segment. Thank you so much for tuning in and being a part of Prime Minister Talks. Our final question for this particular episode deals with the Princess Juliana International Airport. Now that the airport, Prime Minister, has made their airport bridge loan, it's been signed off on, what other measures would St. Martin need to take for the reconstruction of the airport to begin?
Okay, the airport bridge loan was agreed upon a long time ago. It was the repayment of the loan that had become an issue because airport didn't have the funds for it, and St. Martin was actually the middleman in that. We have reached an agreement that we can put off that payment until the airport finalizes its transactions. St. Martin has done more or less almost everything that needed to be done. There is the last part that St. Martin government is responsible for is with the Corporate Governance Task Force, finalizing their recommendations and getting the protocol whereby the structure, the organizational structure of the airport would have been improved. And so that is in its last stages. However, the airport itself has several things that need to be, some more T's that need crossing and I's that need dotting, that are very technical, pertaining to their agreements with Schiphol Airport and with the Netherlands itself, as well as their agreement with the bondholders related to their concession, their loans, etc. So it is not necessarily what St. Martin government has to do that's keeping it back. We've done everything that we have to do. We're in the last phase of executing what had to be done related to the Corporate Governance Task Force, and the rest is really up to the airport to finalize. And we do know that the CFO situation may change, but in the interim, the appointed gentleman who has gone through the process and been approved, etc., gone through the entire screening process, etc., that he would remain until a replacement is found according to the agreement made between all parties.
It has been looked at and considered a great strategic position to be able to place ourselves where you have someone that is from the outside coming in, being placed in these positions, and locals being able to get the opportunity to work along and shadow this individual.
Right.
Will that be something playing out in this scenario?
That is definitely something St. Martin does have a say in. So we will be definitely moving forward in our recommendations that the local counterpart be, that the finalization of that appointment take place as soon as possible, especially seeing as the CFO may change within some period of time, that there is still some continuity in terms of the local representative that would, in the end, be able to replace that person.
As former tour, final question coming from me, at least. I'm a citizen, and I would like to know your formation process. How is things going with that, and how soon can we see the faces of the new government?
Well, there won't be that many new faces. Quite a few of us are returning, and that was under the premise under which Minister Aaron and I were able to travel to the Netherlands to continue these discussions and negotiations. I believe it's going very, very well. Of course, those of us that sit already, the process will be a much shorter one. So we're still awaiting the final checks and balances to be done on some of the new candidates. And once that is done, we will be able to make announcements. Our internal deadline is fast approaching next week, Monday, on the 24th. So if by the 24th we do not have hard and fast, say, go, then I'll be able to update the general public as to, where and when. But I would expect that by the end of the month that we should have a clearer picture. So by this time next week, I should be able to give a better idea as to, are we a go for the beginning of March or not?
Closing words for episode 6. What do you have to say, Pia?
Well, I must say thanks for the positive feedback that I've received on our recent trip to the Netherlands. Both Minister Finance and myself, we really are grateful for the great working relationship with the Minister Plenipotentiary's office in The Hague, with the many preparatory setting up of meetings and also briefing in terms of, the working atmosphere in the Netherlands. I think the office has been underused in our strategic planning in terms of what we would like to achieve when we have our discussions with our counterparts in the Netherlands. And so I must commend them, Minister Violinas and his staff, Mrs. Carol Voges, as well as all of the others who did a really, really good job in getting us the good connections. We met with several entities that I think as we continue to build a bridge, we will get less the feeling of the carrot dangling and we being far away, and ensuring that we utilize all that is within our power at this time to achieve as much as possible for St. Martin. We were also able to discuss a dispute regulation, which is going to the Senate, which is at the Senate. Even though you could say we lost in the second chamber, our will was not achieved. The first chamber, the Senate, still has the opportunity to approve it or veto it. And so we're looking forward to St. Martin being represented in those discussions, those plenary discussions as well. We can also submit questions. So being aware of other ways in which you can influence the decision making, because I think decisions are made without St. Martin and the other islands giving enough input. And so when we utilize all opportunities that are available to us, and then we do not still achieve, then we can, really rant and rave or go in protest or whatever the case may be. But I think we must stand and take responsibility. We were a good functioning economy prior to the hurricane. We must prove that we can get back there with good corporate governance in place, with good accountability for our finances and taking care of our people. And then we will be able to take back some of that autonomy that we have lost over the past few years.
Prime Minister of St. Martin, the Honorable Silveria Jacobs, thank you so much for joining us and being a part of this edition of Prime Minister Talks.
Thank you.
And to our radio listeners and television viewers, thank you for tuning in and being a part of the program. If you've missed it, be sure to tune in every day at 12 p.m. until next week for another edition of Prime Minister Talks right here on St. Martin Gov Radio. And of course, for video on demand, be sure to log on to the official government website, stmartingov.org. On behalf of the Cabinet of the Prime Minister and all of us here at the Department of Communication, I'm Cedric Peterson. Thanks for tuning in.